Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 229, titled Anxiety as a Teacher with Sara Billups. What's the first thing you usually try to do with your anxiety? Solve it, outrun it, pray it away, or just ignore it? For so many of us, anxiety shows up not just as a feeling, but as a whole body experience that can shape how we relate to ourselves, our communities, and our faith. And when it's overwhelming, it's easy to detach from our bodies or to spiritualize the discomfort instead of listening what it might be asking of us. Today, I'm talking with Sara Billups, author of Nervous Systems, whose work explores anxiety not as something to conquer, but as a companion that forms us physically, spiritually, and culturally. Rather than offering quick fixes, Sara invites us to stay present to the places that feel tender and to consider how God might meet us in the ongoing reality of being anxious humans in a demanding world. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy. Today I'm joined by writer and cultural critic Sara Billups. She's the author of Nervous Systems, Spiritual Practices to Calm Anxiety in Your Body, the Church, and Politics. Sara writes out of her own lived experience of inherited, embodied anxiety, tracing how it shows up not only in our personal lives, but in the church and our wider cultures. So she began this book in the tension between the words of Jesus, do not worry, and the impossibility of that command in an age shaped by collective overwhelm. So Nervous Systems is this beautiful invitation to discover how God can meet us not after anxiety is gone, but in the midst of it. So welcome, Sara, to the podcast.
Thanks, Mandy. It's so good to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. As I was reading this book, you write with so much vulnerability about anxiety as part of your lived experience. And I can
Mhm.
easily relate to that. It's not just something that we know about or have studied. What was the moment or season in your life that made you realize, okay, this book needs to be written and I am the one who needs to write this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that how to live well in an anxious age is not theoretical for me. The work is deeply personal, really birthed out of a lifetime of kind of inherited and reinforced anxiety. And so I think that as my parents, who are both towards end of life and both unwell in different ways, my dad has a blood cancer called multiple myeloma. He's had for many years, treatable but not curable. My mom has advanced Parkinson's disease, dementia. I was turning to writing as I tend to do to understand and process some anticipatory grief and try to kind of get my bearings about what it meant to try to care for and love parents towards end of life. And around that time, I began to see how my anxiety had really kind of reached an inflection point, or there was a kind of compounded amount of anxiety manifesting because I think the root of it is really, of course, often lack of control or uncertainty. And I think moving for the last 5 years into a very uncertain time, thinking about my family made the topic feel quite timely and important personally. And then I began to look around at broader systemic kind of collective worry right now in politics and in American Christianity and thought, oh, there's some really interesting threads to pull personally and kind of in a bigger way around these questions of why we're so anxious.
Yeah. It's so interesting because you're right. When you take a look around and you can kind of get out of your own bubble and recognize this is not just an isolated experience. This is a much more holistic, integrated expression that we're all avoiding, like not ready to talk about. And I think that's partly because we can't really see it when we're looking so closely at ourselves. I like to tell people we have mirrors and friends so that we can see what our hair looks like from behind. And it's a very similar
Yeah,
concept,
that's good.
right? So I'm curious, what about when you look back at the process of writing this, what surprised you about your own story that
Yeah.
maybe you didn't see clearly until you put it into the context of culture and tried to put some language to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was trying to understand why am I anxious about my own body and the body of people that I love, the people that
Mhm.
I'm trying to care for and support. And I think I realized that I had this real disconnect. I feel like I was sort of chasing the promise of wellness a little bit, or I don't know, just kind of disconnected from kind of healthy embodiment or understanding of what it means to be a 47-year-old in a body, to have kids growing up as teens and my parents towards end of life. And there, I just felt like I wanted to understand how the kind of body of our own, wherever we are in our journey and the people we love are often linked to my own anxiety. And then thinking about the church body, I just felt like the church has absorbed so much anxiety instead of bearing peace. And I wanted to understand why that response was happening. And then with like what I talk about as the body politic, which is obviously no matter what your political beliefs are, clearly an anxious time wherever you are, whatever side of the aisle. I
Yeah.
felt like, oh, our politics and culture wars have become kind of linked to our own well-being, to us being okay. And there's something there. So those are kind of some of the questions I tried to explore a little bit in the book.
Yeah. Well, I want to start with looking at the body. As a, somatic practitioner and all the grief work that I do, we're very approaching our personhood as holistic, heart, mind, body, spirit, knowing full well we can't leave any of those pieces on the table, right? Just
Yeah.
to kind of touch on, like you mentioned, looking after or pursuing wellness, like yes, and redefine learning to redefine that is so important because it is such a buzzword and such an easy marketing term almost at this point. So
Mhm.
I'm thinking about the body, and just throughout your book, you described your anxiety with such beautiful physical terms like tremors and hums, and even just noticing inherited movement patterns. When did you begin to understand, oh my gosh, my physical body has anxiety actually happening? It's not just my thoughts, and it's not just the beliefs changing around me.
Yeah. I have a very strong mind-body connection. I think maybe most of us can cultivate that. Some of us are kind of born that way, but Enneagram 4, feelings first person. I joke that I was worried about when I was in my mom's womb. It's like I was worried over as a baby in my crib. I was worried over throughout. There was so much worry kind of like sprinkled over my life by my parents, my dad specifically. That came out of a feeling of love, but also because he wanted to make sure that I was going to be okay and I was safe. And so I just saw my own self being taken to the doctor a lot specifically, or every symptom could be a clue to something else that was going on. And so I saw how my parent modeled anxiety and how that was often focused on my young body. That was perfectly normal and healthy, but there was always a question around it. And then I also saw that pattern mirrored in my own dad's life. We had a medical dictionary on the shelf kind of in the 80s before you could Google stuff, before WebMD. So we always had this kind of reference book that he was pulling out. And there was this pattern or cycle of him being worried about a symptom and then talking about it sometimes to me as a kid and hearing scary possibilities, or hearing him talk about his body shaking, or did he have this disease? It's just things that felt confusing and overwhelming. So
Yeah.
I really quickly began to pick up on the fact that maybe the body wasn't safe. Maybe it was something to scan, to be hyper aware of. And so I think that because of my own personality and the way that I'm wired, and also because of what was modeled in an unhealthy way, I became very fixated on my own body. And if it was something that was working for or against me, it began to be kind of other. So I was very disembodied. And I write a lot in this part of the book about how I didn't understand like a healthy embodiment. So I talk about that. And the other thing I'd say is I think I had this idea of embodiment as something that was not accessible to somebody like me. I had this picture. I joke about this picture of this sort of like a woman in, Southern California with like barefoot wearing linen and like, on a cliff kind of stretching. Like I had this idea of what the embodied person was like, and I feel very awkward or introverted or very like my setting is very urban. It seemed different. So I think I had a caricature developed or a stereotype of what it might be to lean more into understanding body that has obviously dramatically shifted, and I have a much fuller understanding of now.
I actually really appreciated that naming of this stereotypical idea of what an embodied woman looks like, because I laughed when I read it, because I don't know that I had necessarily connected the dots, but the second you described the person, I was like, oh, yes, when it was less mainstream to talk about and it was more
Hmm.
connected to even maybe Eastern spiritual practices as opposed to Western embodied living as an actual
Yeah.
state we can attain. And then I started
Yeah.
reflecting on my own story of like, well, there have been moments when I've been washing the dishes and paused to think, what does my body feel like right now? How can I really lean into this? Because I'm standing on a comfort mat in the kitchen because my feet hurt. Okay, I can be with this sensation and be okay with it instead of dissociating and checking out of the
Yeah,
moment.
exactly.
And those moments of embodiment becoming and interconnected with the way we live as humans in mundane moments is such a powerful, um, not even antidote to anxiety, but is a powerful response.
Yeah, because of course that's right where change happens. It's so ordinary and so little,
Mhm.
Those sorts of moments of noticing, being curious about something I might feel in my body as it reacts to something I hear or experience has been a huge shift for me, especially because I tend to be type A or move at a fast pace, or I'm always sort of thinking about different things I'm really managing a lot, or I'm administrative or whatever. So there's been a profound learned way to take space and notice that was very difficult and counterintuitive at first, and has become quite natural and quite integrated now, at least on good days.
Yeah. When we have the moment of awareness, and that's okay. I think that's important to point out. Like it's never going to be the same day to day, regardless of what practices we've created for ourselves,
Yeah.
because we're literally transforming every day. Speaking of transforming, I'm thinking about people who are listening right now because they are all over the map when it comes to spiritual practices and beliefs. And so I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are listening with a lens of spiritually traumatic backgrounds or a
Yeah.
loss of faith. And so I think for many people, especially who are living through trauma, spiritual practices don't really land well until
Hmm.
their nervous system can create some safety to receive them. And so I was just
Hmm.
thinking so much about all of the different prayer practices that you've offered and as care for your anxious body. How do you see bodily safety creating space for all of those spiritual practices that you've described in the book?
Yeah, I think that gosh, I love that question. I think a couple of things. First, it's important to like let yourself off the hook. I remember I go to a monthly spiritual director, and I remember Dan said to me one time, just don't pray. Like like just you can take walks, notice stuff, but I had a lot of anxiety around am I doing enough? I'm talking about scrupulosity or religious OCD in the book a little bit. This idea or impulse to continue to kind of move forward in practices, even if it feels like it's counterintuitive or kind of not where you are. Because who am I if I'm a person that doesn't pray in the same way I've always prayed? Who am I if I do not have like quiet time in the morning? And so that felt incredibly provocative to me when he said that. And so I just started walking. I started doing a long loop, 45-minute loop down and up a big hill near my house in Seattle. I started noticing and very like I don't know, within the first couple of weeks, I just saw myself, oh, there's the tree that has the branch hanging upside down that kind of looks like a lung. I mean, I'm very like literary and visual. Or there's the tree that kind of has the kind of loop over it that looks sort of like a canopy. I just began to notice, and then I took a little time to kind of think, wow, God, if you're here and real, can I sense your love and goodness in created things? So just allowing yourself space to do that and to not feel compelled to old practices if that's not where you are, I think is really healthy and spacious. And then after that, I began to I've at different points of my life had a lot of trouble accepting that I'm loved by God. It's something that if we grow up in the church, we hear all the time, but it's very hard to accept or metabolize. So I spent a couple of years reading a short verse every morning about God's love and just sitting with it. And that's what I did. And so I took time to begin to, one, notice in the natural world God in creation, and then two, begin to, as a person that identifies as a Christian and is very my life is very centered around that practice, I began to then understand or invite the love of God into these moments, these walks. I brought them together. And then it became very freeing and very grounded and easier for me to then enter and think about prayer in a different way. So I think spiritual practices can then kind of be layered on when we come to a place of spaciousness and safety in those times, I guess.
Yeah, gosh, your observation of the love of God in creation is such a Franciscan approach, which has
Yeah,
always
totally.
deeply resonated with me. And I also love that your spiritual director said something that let you off the hook, because that echoes what a pastor friend of mine said once upon a time, who when I was dealing with my own anxiety and struggles around faith practices, and he said, if the Bible hurts to read right now, then don't read it. And
Yeah.
it was such a permission slip to allow an expression of spirituality to develop beyond my cognitive brain,
That's
which
so good. Yeah.
it is. And it's such a integrative permission for people to say, like, what else is available to you in the world of spirituality if you have to expand. And I think that that's where a lot of anxiety around the church body can be really heavy for people, is that there are so
hmm
many expectations, and liturgies don't feel freeing, they feel restrictive, right? And
hmm
I was raised in a Lutheran church where there's lots of formula and tradition. And honestly, I loved it as a young person. And even as an adult, I can see where I would return to it at some point because of the comfort and familiarity of it, making things a little more predictable. Um, I do think that provides some safety, I think, for people who are
hmm
living anxiously in a faith context.
Yeah, the other thing that I started to do was look backwards, look more at kind of ancient writings and practices, saints from different eras. I think that when we can kind of get out of our kind of historical context and look back and more broadly, it can be really grounding. I started reading or praying almost every morning. Saint Teresa of Lisieux has this daily offering. It's just a minute long, but she says, "Oh my God, I ask for myself and for those dear to me the grace to fulfill perfectly your holy will, to accept the joys and sorrows of this passing life." Just a real, like, beauty. And she lived a short life. She had a lot of, she suffered, she was unwell. Like, she, I think, died in her 20s. So I talk a lot about, again, anxiety around the body and the church, anxiety around uncertainty. But just like seeing models in the historic people from the faith that, like, man, lived short lives, but like beautiful lives, lived presently, were able to really open their hands and say, you know, I asked for myself the grace to fulfill perfectly whatever you want to do, God. Like, talk about being able to rest in love. So, looking at the Desert Fathers and just thinking about other people way before us that had gone through much more difficult, maybe things, and had been able to be faithful and clear and at rest in terms of at least what they presented and what we have with their written life, has
Yeah.
been really good for me.
I love that. It reminds me about you were talking about Ignatian spirituality and holy indifference and even Benedictine monasteries, and how they are such a major turning point for you in your own story, and how they invite surrender and presence for
hmm
us. And I think that that historical observation, because the context of their stories is so different, and certainly less modern, certainly less like ease. There's less
Yeah.
tools to make everything feel simple, right? They didn't have
hmm
AI writing our books for us. And hopefully neither do
hmm
we. But just that willingness to recognize, why must we say advancement is the only source of wisdom?
Yeah, that's good. That's right. Yeah, I think that there was a certain the thing that happened, I grew up in an evangelical setting. A lot of the message, at least in the 80s and 90s for me, maybe it's like this now for some folks, is that Catholicism is sort of, we're not sure if people are really Christians if they're Catholic, or let's be skeptical, or, we have a purer way, or just it
Sure.
was a very different way completely than I than I think about things now. But
Yeah.
um, we didn't really look at Catholic practices or at contemplative practices because they were suspicious. Maybe they were Eastern. Maybe they were leading to a slippery slope. There was just a lot of kind of false narratives and kind of a fear-based division or
Yeah.
separation. But I write in the book about how there was a woman named Debbie Tacky Smith that came on staff at, I go to an Anglican church, came on staff at Grace in 2014 and brought a lot of contemplative practices, Lectio Divina, the Examen, um, half-day retreats, contemplative weekends, things that I just had never experienced. And I think in that era in the church, there were a lot of people kind of exploring kind of the mid 2010s, some of these things. So we were definitely like in that mix. Started direction. Things profoundly shifted for me by looking back. I knew there was this thing called the Ignatian spiritual exercises. They seemed very serious. My life was very busy. But then I realized a couple years ago when things intensified with my mom and dad with caregiving, there was never going to be the right time. So I did this 9 month, it's called a retreat. It's a modified 1 hour a morning thing. That was certainly by far the most profound thing that I've experienced in my life as a person that follows Jesus. And man, the idea of kind of Ignatius saying, can we be indifferent to whatever outcome? He talks about these binaries, a long life or a short life, fame or disgrace, health or illness, whatever the outcome, can we be so open-handed that we believe that we want what God desires more than what we desire? Can we be free to the outcome because we are so convicted that in the process, good things come? And I don't know. I just struggled with that, and then it kind of made sense to me. So I read a little bit about that journey in the book. And when I say indifference, I don't mean not caring. I very much mean taking time to kind of ground ourselves so that we then can be better equipped to ground outside to kind of offer presences of peace or do the work of justice or care or outward work as a result of kind of inward calm, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Well, and I love that because that's the integrative work, right? That's that holistic heart, mind, body, spirit recognition that as we continue to pursue an inner scaffolding, as I like to call it, that inner framework that keeps us inflated and bolstered and present and able to stand through all the chaos that happens, then we can actually move toward other people and move toward the things that bring us to life, that align with our values and that make us feel engaged and connected. And I'm thinking a little bit
Mhm.
too about how in that inner work, it's not just that spiritual approach, right? There is a physiological nervous system component to it. And I'm curious, just from your opinion, I know you're not a nervous system person, meaning like expert, but how do you see your own experience of spiritual formation working in tandem with nervous system regulation and repair?
Yeah, I think that the postures that I have learned to take through things like this Ignatian retreat for 9 months, or an hour a day, or going away for a weekend retreat, or doing whatever kind of practices I can do in whatever season I'm in, have really helped me have sort of um, brought a certain congruence, my mental health and my spiritual health, and I hope the way that I treat my body, the way that I feed myself, the way that I move my body. I hope those things can all feel more aligned, not perfectly, but so that I can present myself to other people in a way that is more present, more rested. I tend to be, I talk about caregiving in the book, Mandy, and I'm very administrative in my care, but I'm not an Enneagram 2. I'm not necessarily the kind of care I might want to offer my mom and dad right now in my mind is very, let me put a blanket around you and let's walk around the lake and reflect. But it actually is like, do we need to do a med shift? And can I get you to your appointment in between meetings on Thursday, Dad? That's what it's like right now. And so the practices that I can do around being well formed and fully congruent in how I'm thinking about taking care of myself to prepare for those sorts of days, and the way that I can think about the way that I think about my own purpose, my own sense of calling, how those things can come together. Theoretically, if it is again a good day, gives me a framework and space and permission to be present. And that's something that I for a long time resisted. I think that for many years I thought I'm gonna be there for my parents and my kids, and I'm gonna work full time, and I'm gonna make it work. I'm gonna push for it, and that just led to such burnout, and my nervous system was pretty fried. um, I began to let myself be present and say that today I'm taking my mom to the neurologist, and then my dad has an oncologist appointment. I'm going to make dinner and I'm going to answer emails, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'll tell you, like the presence that can come, the kind of being calm on the inside that can then like go into the day has been pretty profound. And so I'm trying to practice that more, but really trying to think and hold on to more of the idea of emotional, physical, and spiritual congruence has been something that's been coming up a lot for me in these years.
I love that because I'm picturing you you're talking about attunement of noticing like what's going on within and being gentle in our response. I think so many of us, especially in Western culture, have become accustomed to that forceful kind of bull in the china shop approach to caring for ourselves. Like, if I
Yeah.
just take 6 hours of yoga this week and
Yeah.
eat every fresh vegetable I come across, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be
Yeah.
fine. And I'm the testament to I can sleep 8 hours and still not feel rested if
Yeah.
I'm
That's
not
right.
attending to all of the things. And I don't even mean all of the things. If I'm not attending to the thing that is in front of me, the thing that's, crying out for support and help. And I think that your book is a very beautiful expression of how your first approach being a spiritual opening and an awareness and just a welcoming to allowing a new understanding of God to come in and meet you in the anxiety rather than removing it. I think that that's a really wonderful invitation and example. And I'm curious, how do you see um, the nervous system react? Like, how do you,
Mm-hmm.
with others around you, especially as a caregiver, notice your own practices of attunement impacting the people that you're caring for and also just your family? Are they
Yeah.
able to take it in and take little notes, or are they like, oh cool,
Yeah.
mom's calm, great, everyone else is on fire but mom's fine?
No, there's two things that come up. That's yeah, the first is no, it has not these practices have not necessarily transformed my crankiness if it's been a long day. There are plenty of times where I may be kind of pre-grieving something really difficult. My mom experiences psychosis and hallucinations sometimes, for example, in her Parkinson's disease dementia, and those are very dark and difficult days. Sometimes when that happens, when her meds aren't regulated or we have to make a shift. And there are plenty of times when I do not show up as an integrative person in the way that I would like to. But what I've gotten good at, what we try to model, I've got a almost 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, we model repair all the time. So I think that this process has helped me instead of avoiding or pushing down, like I just expect there to be difficult days. There was a day a couple of months ago where I had a really hard talk with my dad. It was very sad. I just like ended up it was trying to make dinner. I just sat on the kitchen floor and I was just crying for a few minutes. And my daughter was there and she saw me and I thought, my first thought was, oh, I need to hide this. She shouldn't know. My second was like to tell her, you know, a, I'm okay, and your job is not to like. I don't need you to like try to fix me. Like I'm taking care of myself. But B, like I want you to be like, and you're at the age where I can welcome you in. Like I want you to see what this process is like because we're walking through this as a family. And so I hope that those practices, as well as modeling, saying that I'm sorry or that we can do that well for each other and being really gracious is good because I'm really trying to lead us with a certain gentleness that I first give myself. And so if we mess up or make a mistake, I'm trying to model that, or I'm trying to model in the moment. Please see where I am in a way that is responsible and appropriate as a mother, but also know that I'm okay and I'm being gentle with myself and I'm trying to model that for you. So that's what I'm trying to do. And this season is very long. Again, it's been 5 years of very active kind of pre-grieving and caring and little earthquakes. And so that's something that we're trying to work out through a very long trajectory that we don't know the end of, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and anticipatory grief with family members, especially younger ones, can be a huge source of anxiety. And you touched on it at the beginning as well with the stories about your father being curious about and transferring his own anxiety
Yeah.
about your body and what might be going on. So
Yeah.
that becomes a very difficult lesson that you have to repeat with kids. And I think it's admirable for your awareness to be like, we're going to be very appropriate age wise of what you know and what you don't know, because that too becomes a challenge as parents when we are also grieving and also overwhelmed to be vulnerable and to let them see, hey, we are human and we're
Yeah.
still the parent, and being
Exactly.
vulnerable doesn't
Exactly.
mean I lose control, don't
That's
have
right.
access to strength. It's interesting too. I wanted to touch on the idea of access to strength because I know a lot of people will say things like, I'm a strong person, I shouldn't be going through this, right? Or
Mm.
I'm such a strong, confident, why am I feeling anxious? And it makes me just wonder, with the person who is also practicing a faith, what does hope in these moments of anxiety look like when someone's anxiety remains like deeply embedded? in their
Yeah.
bodies, even as their faith grows or as their spiritual practices are deepening?
Yeah, I think that where my mind goes with that question is that hopefully there's an invitation for that person to reach out towards community. I think that in our times of weakness, whether that is a time of spiritual doubt or desolation or deconstruction or questioning or a feeling of abandonment or a lack of safety, or if a church has failed you, I hope that there would still be an invitation to reach out to somebody that is safe, to reach out to somebody that you do trust. I find that the more that we keep in these feelings, the more sort of distilled they are. And I think that also applies to other areas too. Mandy, I was just the other week, I was having a difficult week with a lot coming up with my, but I think it was like the book release week, and then my parents had a lot of big appointments, and something was going with my kid, and I realized, oh, I'm trying to manage this because I'm afraid that if I talk about it, I'll seem like it's too much. Or do you know when how I think I write in the book about how when the kind of casserole season of grief or caregiving is over, kind of the time after when it seems like you probably should be okay or have it together. Just and just I had a hard week where I realized, oh, I think that I'm trying to manage how people I love might perceive me because it's just, what if it just gets worse later and my parents have not passed? And then I'll really need that kind of casserole. I was trying to kind of manage those emotions and realize, like, oh, the invitation, it's not my job to do that. It's my job to reach out and say, hey, I need some support here and I need to feel strength and courage and I want to be honest. And I realized when someone does that in my life, I am so happy to be kind of let in and welcomed. And so I think I think I'm trying to sort of move towards that as hopefully a healthier way, even if we feel sort of stuck or embedded or in process, to kind of help at least have people carry it with us. I think if it's doubt or grief or fear, not carrying it alone has been interestingly not intuitive to me because I realized I'm afraid of asking too many times. And I just kind of let that go a little bit, and it's felt tremendously liberating and welcoming, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that. I'm kind of linking back to this whole conversation and the book itself, and particularly about the political approach and just the conversations
Yeah.
about how fear driven all of these decisions and reactionary
Yeah.
actions within the church, even and in ourselves, can be. And I'm curious, what do you hope readers of this book and even just listeners of this conversation will begin to practice with themselves after hearing your
Yeah.
story and thinking about these nervous systems?
I hope a noticing of anxiety response with curiosity. For example, just to say, like, for just a moment with political anxiety, again, whatever our politics are, I think that I wrote this book in 2023 called Orphaned Believers that traced back from the 80s and 90s some culture war stuff and looked at Christian nationalism and tried to understand how we kind of got where we are with a lot of division today. And when I talked about that book a few years ago, there was such a desire to reach across the aisle. Everybody had a like an uncle that was into Pizzagate, or there was some kind of like Facebook kind of breakage, or people wanted to reconcile. And now I've noticed that there's this trend towards almost like if you open your hand or extend your hand across the aisle, it's almost like a contagion. Like we could be kind of contaminated by association with someone that believes something that may very well be vitriolic, right? But it's like, man, that's uncomfortable work. But when we do that, there is at least the invitation towards repair. There is a open-handedness, and instead of an anxiety response, you are seeing the person first. So I hope that people will read the book and see that there is an invitation towards seeing shared humanity, towards instead of anxiety, modeling non-anxious presence. There's these Benedictine vows of stability and fidelity, of staying put, of kind of calming down. I'm hoping that people can see practical ways that that can be brought into their lives, regardless of faith background. And if you're a person who does not identify as a Christian who reads the book, I hope it's this interesting pulling back of the curtain, like, hey, things are kind of wild over here, guys. And this impacts all of us in America or anywhere, really. These dynamics are coming up in a lot of different ways, regardless of your practice. So I hope it's at least interesting culturally. And most of all, I hope that people who read the book that are either personally anxious or love somebody who is or sense anxiety in the system can kind of have an invitation to take a beat, to kind of calm down, to have a broader thought of history, to have a better understanding of your body and I don't know. I hope that they can find a way to hold uncertainty and real questions because, spoiler alert, the book is not, here's a self-help way to not be anxious anymore. It is a way that we can find, as you mentioned in the beginning, that God can meet us, that we can be met and hold and whole in the very presence of our anxiety. The idea is not to get to leave, but to see how, as Nick Cave talks about, joy and suffering are different sides of the same coin. And maybe by sitting with our anxiety, we can understand our creativity more. We can understand how we can extend empathy. We can understand with more depth who we are and how we can better show up for other people.
Yeah, it's so important to recognize that even within the phrase calming down, the goal has to be being present with ourselves, even when things aren't calm, that we can have
That's right.
access to regulation and repair and connection with one another after we make it with ourselves and give ourselves permission to really settle into, okay, things are not okay right now, but I can be okay amidst it. And what helps keep me grounded and connected and really rooted in love and in compassion and curiosity and open handedness for myself while I'm existing in this very
Hmm.
uncertain experience and community.
Yeah. Well, we're all human together.
Yeah, for better or for worse, we are all, in fact, quite human together. Yes, that's perfect. Sarah,
Hmm.
this has been such a wonderful conversation. Your book, Nervous Systems, is available all over the where now. And it's just a wonderful, like I said, vulnerable expert approach to becoming curious and recognizing there is no quick fix, but there are ways to take a step toward ourselves without condemnation and a critical voice that's not geared to wholeness, not tearing ourselves down. So, Sarah, if anyone wants to get in touch with you and learn more about your other work, where can they find you?
Oh, thanks, Mandy. I've loved this conversation so much. I'm on Instagram at sarah.billups, and then I write Bitter Scroll on Substack.
I love it. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. And if you're listening, go get a copy of Nervous System, Spiritual Practices to Calm Anxiety in Your Body, the Church, and the Politics, wherever you buy books. And
Thank you.
go follow Sarah too.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to episode 229 of Restorative Grief. I want to honor the tenderness of what we've explored with Sarah today. We've talked about anxiety as something that lives in our bodies, shapes our stories, and deserves to be met with curiosity rather than shame. Whether or not you come from a spiritual background or maintain a spiritual practice, I hope this conversation invites you to move gently with yourself, to notice what your body has been holding, and to remember that healing does not require you to rush or perform. You're not alone in this. Your experience matters, and there is room for you exactly as you are. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I hope you'll take a moment to hit subscribe and to stick around for future essays and conversations about how we tend to grief and loss in our lives in tangible, manageable ways. Please be sure to also leave a review if you loved this conversation, and you can check out the show notes for links to Sarah's work and social media. Thank you as always to patrons of the show. If you are interested in becoming a patron of the show or want to gain access to the workbook for this conversation, visit patreon.com/Mandy Capehart. I hope you feel a little more settled and open-handed as you go into your day in your own relationship to anxiety after hearing this conversation. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.